Hey guys, today we are at the St. Nicholas Church in Millvale, and we are checking out these wonderful murals made by a man of the name of Maxo Vanka. And now they are doing this restoration, and I'm up here on these scaffoldings, and we're going to talk to some artists and learn about this church and the murals and why it's important to do the restoration.
So who's Maxo Vanka? Why do we need to save Maxo Vanka? How did he get here? I often talk about there being sort of two parallel stories, right? There was this community here in Pittsburgh of the Croatians. They were not necessarily Croatia at the time, but what is now Croatia. Maybe 40 to 50,000 people here at the turn of the century. And so this church was built in 1900. There was a fire in the 1920s. A new priest came in to rebuild the church, and then it was sitting here for about 10 years with just white walls, which, if you can imagine the space with just blank walls. And so the priest, Father Gaugler, was looking for someone, the right person to paint these murals. He didn't want necessarily the same kind of thing that was everywhere else. And so I said the other story that's happening at the same time is that Maxo Vanka is born in 1889 to nobility, but his parents were not married. So as a child, illegitimate child, he is sent to live with a peasant family. The family pays for his upkeep. And when he's about 8 years old, his grandfather discovers that he exists, finds him, brings him back to the family, and gives him, all of the education that he could need, all of the, the wealth that he needed. And so we see Maxo Vanka has this very particular interest in sort of the privilege of wealth and then what his life was like when he was living on this working farm. And he stayed in touch with his foster mother his whole life. All right, but that's still Vanka's over in Europe, right? At some point, he goes to Belgium, he goes to art school. He serves in the Belgian Red Cross during World War I, sees the war firsthand. That's really impactful for him as well, and you can see that anti-war stance in these murals. He returns to Zagreb, the Croatian capital. He's teaching art, he's making art, and then he meets his wife. And this is sort of a turning point in the story. Margaret Stenton was from a very wealthy New York Jewish family, and she was in Europe, traveling, looking at all of the big hot spots of Europe, and they meet. Short stories, they fall in love, get married, have a little girl, and this is the early 1930s. In the early 1930s in Europe, especially, not a safe place for him with his Jewish wife. Because she's an American, they're able to immigrate to the United States. But he has to rebuild his career. So he starts traveling around the country, right? Especially what I would call the Rust Belt, right? He goes to Cleveland and Pittsburgh and all these other cities where he sketches the workers, he sketches the mills. And of course, when he's in Pittsburgh in 1935, this is where these two stories intersect, right? He meets Father Gaugler through mutual friends. Father Gaugler sees that this man understands and is interested in sort of the plight of the everyday person. So he brings him in here first in 1937, and he paints his first round of murals, which have a very close emphasis on the old world and the new world, sort of the immigrant story. The mural behind me is the immigrant mother raises her son for American industry. There's a lot of criticism of, there was the war back in Europe, but then people come here and they're still losing their lives sort of senselessly in this ongoing struggle. And he's identifying with the people in the congregation, saying the mothers are the ones, or the women are the ones who are sort of holding it together, but they're the ones grieving. He comes back again in 1941, and World War II, of course, has broken out, and so there's a much more emphasis on sort of the war and wanting to sort of talk more about peace and talk more about, how do we come together in community? And I think that's where those ideas of justice and love really come through. And so that's sort of the long, maybe, version of how Maxo Vanka got here and painted. We have done the work to help completely redo the roof, right, to prevent more water from coming in. There's things that you don't necessarily think about in preserving a space, because these murals are on the walls. We can't remove them, right? They are here. So it's partly preserving the whole building as well as the murals themselves. In the mural behind me, there's a little black square in the upper left corner on the woman's white handkerchief, and that gives you an idea of how dirty these murals were when they were clean. So they left that square purposely dirty. if you kind of think of how dirty the whole mural was, and then we have special lights on them. So you turn those lights off, it was really hard to see them. And so the people here by the 80s and 90s just kind of thought of it as the wallpaper. They didn't really know it was there because you literally couldn't see the murals. So as we're unveiling them, right, we're getting those stories and kind of bringing those stories back to the front. Right now, this giant scaffolding is here. It's coming down at the end of September, which is 2024. The last section will be cleaned in early 2025. This year in October, when this scaffolding's all down, we're gonna have sort of a reveal party, a celebration. That's Monday, October 28th in the evening, to kind of have a chance to bring people back, especially people who've been here on tours during the restoration. It's very cool to see conservation, but then you're also kind of missing the ceiling. So that'll be our chance to say, like, come see the ceiling. Like, you'll see the one section that hasn't been finished, aside from the altar area. And that is another project. So as I said, ongoing things and like the fundraising for all of this is going to be ongoing. Yeah.
Well, I'm here with Naomi Ruiz, who is an art conservator and working on bringing back the life into these murals right here at the St. Nicholas Church in Millvale, the Maxo Vanka murals. How are you doing?
Doing good. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and what an interesting project. Can you tell me what you've been going through? Now, you said how many months are you working on this project?
So we started in this section of the wall paintings in early June, and we're planning to finish by the end of September. So I've been here 6 days a week doing that since then. And then last year I did 3 months in the New Testament section in, I think, also the summer of 2023, or fall of 2023.
What are the challenges when doing this kind of a restoration?
This is definitely my most challenging project that I've ever worked on, I think, mostly because it is a water-sensitive paint. So what we're doing is we're adjusting the pH of the water to make it more basic so that it has a less of an effect on that water-soluble paint. We're also experimenting with some microemulsions, which are like suspensions of water in oil, to kind of like lessen that degree of intensity for the cleaning. I don't really know how else to say that.
Wow, so it's very piecemeal as you do this, I guess, the way that you're describing it.
Yeah. Our technique that we're using is, since it is water sensitive, we're lightly tamping with the sponge to kind of remove that first layer of soot. But actually, if you attack it too heavily and too quickly, then you do deteriorate that paint layer. So you have to like start in a section, work an area lightly, then move to another section, work that lightly, and then you can go back. And actually, we tend to go back at least like 3, 4, 5 times.
Wow.
So to say like, oh, it takes us X amount of days to finish this section, it's really not something you're continuously working on for hours at a day. You really have to like move around the wall painting to finish the whole thing.
So why is restoring this important?
I think that these murals really represent a large population here in Pittsburgh specifically. It tells like the immigrant story, which even though maybe it was like bigger in the 1930s and 40s, it's still a story that's happening across the US right now. So I think that it can relate to a lot of people's stories because a lot of us are immigrants or descendants of immigrants.
Is there one piece or one of the murals that you're drawn to?
Ooh, like, do I have a favorite?
Well, I don't want to say favorite, but maybe, I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I really love every figure in these murals. The Seraphim and Jesus is really great. Like that hair, just the way Vanka like highlights and shades with different colors instead of just like shading with a black or a white. He's using like a green to highlight the cheeks, or really I think that the way he paints is beautiful.
So what are the goals of the restoration?
I would say our main goals were cleaning. I mean, Pittsburgh is and was a very like heavy industry area, so they were really dark and almost illegible in a lot of areas.
Wow.
They're still like looking at the section behind us in the Old Testament, which we're planning to do next year. I mean, it's just completely dark. You can barely see any of the figures without light shining on it. And now we're like in this area that has been fully cleaned. All that Pittsburgh soot and dirt has been removed.
Yeah.
I think that's really making it more legible for everyone to actually read and understand the story that Vanka was trying to tell. They finished in, the 1941, and since about 2011, conservators have been slowly working on all the murals inside of the church.
Okay.
But since most of us are freelance, we have to just like choose a small section of the year to work on a little bit at a time. So it has been an ongoing project, but we're almost done.
I can't wait to see it.
Me too.
In the church, I've been on the beginning of from the first campaign. I think it's 2010 we started. And I do a lot of work of any kind of in touching or retouching, I should say, infilling and painting of losses of the original paint. And so the disciples on the front of the church, to the right and left of the altar, they were probably the most damaged in the whole church. I've already sort of worked in from photos, or the first step that I really sort of take as a painting conservator, we're not taking the liberty to paint or alter anything from the original artist. And so I find what I've been doing, because you're seeing it sort of where I've gone through everybody one time. I have previous photos, I think I showed Ellen, where you could barely tell where some of the features were, especially the ones that are on the end. So I start with looking at the color of the palette, what's original, where it's been really abraded in here, for instance. And so we pull in, I could see the color that was used underneath here. And from there, I'll start to just point in and create and bring back, because this is completely down to the surface of the wall. So just bring them back in the areas that are lost with color, points of color. And we came upon these photos that were taken after it was painted, which really helped, because the two faces at the end were so braided, I was not even able to see the placement of different parts of the features, or the eyes, exactly how they were set, eyebrows. I could see shadowing now, because between the abrasion that had happened, or the fading of the color, sometimes we're going to undercoats, so you're not able. So I've gone around to churches in some areas before on some of the other campaigns, and maybe saw if one hand was really abraded and the other hand was there, I was able to work with Vanka's colors that he used. That over here was just completely impossible. So it's really helped, because I wouldn't have been able to, I would really bring them back. They'd have to stay in a readable stage, but I was able to bring back more of how he painted and what the lines were that were not apparent to me. So I kind of interweaved the colors. This area right before it started today had white infills, because there was salt damage that were treated, and then the holes were filled. And then after that, I've slowly, with points and points of color, brought it back in, all of the losses there. So that's what I'm over here doing. I'm doing a lot of it, but we're getting towards the end. So I'll give an example. So I just I have a palette mixed up of some of the colors, and then trying, because it's sort of like a pixel concept, when you sort of overlap some of the color, you can create, I can create how he intended the hand to be read. Like that one is me going over and over and over with points of color, but not taking the liberty to paint what I see, and to sort of weave it into something that you can read, and then looking at photos if I need to see where there might have been lines that weren't apparent for me to see. So that's what I'm doing here with the retouch.
Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, Mark, let's.
I just want to get a close up of her hand doing this.
Sure, yeah.
And then I'd like to show some of these.
All right, sure. Let's see, hold on.
People are going to be coming
Hold
up,
on.
so I want to start going down
Okay.
so I can give them space.
So,
I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And good luck with everything.
oh yeah, we're getting towards the end here. We only have a couple more.
Sharing the story of the immigrant Croatian community that was here, but I also get to hear the stories of young folks and not so young folks who come here and maybe see their own stories reflected back to them or world events reflected back to them. Many kids come here knowing a lot of the stories of the Catholic Church, and then some come here with absolutely no experience in churches. And so it's sort of finding the balance between, understanding this is a sacred space. We talk about this space a lot as a text, a space that you can read, and you can read the layers of history. So you might be looking at it from the point of view of a religious sacred space, right, of course, but we can also look at it in the layers of the stories of specific murals, of the way the murals sort of talk to each other. And we've got these themes of love, and then justice and injustice are right next to us. We often talk about what do those words mean, right? Love is not a specific one thing, right? And that idea of what is love can change over time. And so we try to find those like timeless, international kind of universal themes that anybody can come to see these murals and kind of find something in them that they can connect to, even if they're not Catholic, right? I think that's a big thing. Donations, when people come for tours, people buy our merchandise, they come to events, all of that goes towards this project. But also people want to donate more. You can go to their website, which is vankamurals.org, and there is a donate button that you can go and you can give a tax-deductible donation if you'd like. We are a nonprofit, so it's also possible to come to some of our events. We usually have an annual fundraiser too, with ticket sales, and so that's always a way to kind of see the murals and participate in fundraising. But any amount helps, right? And I think telling your friends, once people have come here, word of mouth is still our number one way of communicating. Someone comes and then they tell their friends, and that's a way to bring your family back during, the holidays, or, someone's visiting from out of town. I feel like those are those really intimate, special moments where we get to revisit it with somebody and then introduce it to new people. It's always awesome.